Hi everybody, we're here today to go over the dual rate spring kit for the Walker Evans needle shock. So this is the shock that comes on the XP 1000s, pretty much all models, and more recently you can get this same shock set up on the turbos as well. So it's going to range from 14 through essentially 18 with Walker Evans shocks. There's some other models that have a different shock, but this kit is specifically designed to work with the Walker Evans needle shock. So just to run over what's included in the kit, you have new front tenders. That's going to be the shortest spring in the kit. Your rear tenders are going to be the next tallest spring, and then the 14-inch long coil is your front main that is going to pair with the new tender. And then the tall 16-inch spring is going to be your main spring to go with the rear tender. So pretty straightforward. It's also included is new lower retainers. That's going to replace the stock retainer that's cast. This will allow us to run the longer main with the tender that we like to run on this kit. Also, one of the most important things to this kit is the adjustable crossover, and this is actually for the rear shock. So there's two of these rings included. They're two-piece. I've already pulled the little set screws out. So what this allows you to do on the rear shock is put the crossover nut on the shock without having to take the shock apart. So you're able to actually go to a true dual rate, and this will fit inside of this spring here after it's all assembled, and we'll go over that when we show you how to put them on the shocks. So not many tools are required. A 1/4-inch punch is required to adjust preload on the rears. The fronts is a little bit smaller punch. I've got a 1/4-inch punch here that fits the rears, and then a small Allen wrench to take these screws out when you install the two-piece crossover. So a measuring tape or a set of calipers to set the rear crossover. Other than that, there's not many hand tools needed. The basic hand tools to get the shocks off, up front it's 15mm, in the rear it's 18mm, and a straight screwdriver to pull the reservoir off. But you can do it in your garage with a simple jack, so it is a kit that you can handle on your own at home. So we'll leave it at that, and we're going to move on and show you actually how to put the springs on the front shock and then the rear shock next. Alright, so we're going to go over the front and the easiest ways that we found to install these. This front retainer you can loosen with a 1/4-inch punch. The rear is the 3/8, so make note of that, but they'll fit right in these holes because sometimes you can't turn them by hand if you've already jacked a whole bunch of preload in there trying to band-aid the incorrect springs. But you want to get that backed off so that you can lift up the springs and get your retainer off. The instructions kind of walk you through that, but you're going to pull that off and set that to the side, pull off your stock springs, set those out of the way. You are going to reuse this. Now there's a couple of different models and spring kit options. So the older cars came dual rated on the front, so you're going to reuse this divider, but it needs to be modified. So we're going to go over that really quick. So we'll set this to the side and we'll modify this divider. And in your instruction, these can be found on our website as well as they should be in your box. But it says in there that this needs to be shortened by 0.7, essentially 3/4 of an inch. So if you have a measuring tape, you can measure the 0.7, it's just under 3/4 of an inch, and make a mark. So with my calipers, I'm able to just scribe a line, and I'll make a mark with my marker at 0.7. Then what I like to do is just take and make a mark in a couple of spots, and then you can take a piece of tape and wrap around it and use a hacksaw, or where it's plastic you could use a wood saw. So I'm just going to go and cut these on our lathe really quick, but you can do it just like this. So the tape will allow you to get a little bit straighter cut. If you just want to mark it all the way around and use that, you can. But a piece of black tape or athletic tape or painter's tape will work too. So run that tape around it like that. You can't see it very good because it's black tape, but it gives me a nice straight line. Then you can just take your hacksaw, put it in a vise or on your table, and saw right on that line. And then you can use a piece of sandpaper and sand it flat because you want this end to be level. because when we reinstall this kit, this long lip is actually going to go inside of the tender. So this is now your crossover point. So we're going to hit the pause button. I'm going to hurry and go and cut this off on the lathe, and I'll come back in and we'll put the rest of the kit on. Alright, so I went and cut this off on the lathe, but like I said, you can cut it off with the saw. If your cut's a little bit out of square, just get a piece of sandpaper and a flat surface and you can sand it flat. Cut it a little bit long, so 0.7 is the measurement, so you can go just a little bit less than that so you can sand down to that 0.7. It's not super critical. You want to be within about 100 thousandths, and then we're going to reuse that as the crossover point on the front. So you're going to slide your tender on just like your stocking came off. The whole spring pack is actually a little bit shorter with our setup, so we're going to run this back down. In the instructions, it'll tell you about how much preload to put in when you start. I want to say it's just a few turns. This one happens to be for a 4-seater that we're putting together, so I'm probably going to put 4 turns of preload in it once I get the spring on. So you put your tender on. Doesn't matter which direction they go. As you can see here, it's a progressive tender, so it's wound tighter at one and the other. I kind of like to put the open coils towards the reservoir, but as long as the right and left match, it does not matter. So now that you have the spring divider in there, that's the key, is we're flipping that over. When it came off stock, it had the lip going towards the main. Now we're going to put that lip inside the tender because that's going to be our crossover point now. Then your main, the new spring retainer, and right now we have so 0 preload would be until this touches. So now that the spring pack's on there, you can turn this until it touches. So now there's no play, that's 0 preload. And then what I like to do is just mark it with a marker, mark an X somewhere, and then you can count the revolutions. And you should be able to do all this by hand. Now you don't have to take it off the car. You can leave your front and your rear shock mounted up on the car. We have them off obviously to show you everything, but you can do all this while it's on the car. You can leave it the top done up and just undo your bottom bolt and swing it out, and you can slide everything off and everything on without taking it off the car. So now that I have that there, I'm just going to count 4 turns, and that's going to be a starting point for the front preload. So 4 turns of preload on the front. And now you can tune it from there. So if you're riding and it feels really good right there, you can fine tune with your clicker that you still have. If it's a little bit soft, you're going to add turns of preload until you get to the bottoming resistance that you're looking for. And as you add that preload, it can change your ride height, but it's also going to force this crossover point to happen sooner, which gives you more final poundage. So essentially it's going to make the whole curve stiffer. Not just change your ride height, it'll actually force it to cross over sooner onto the main and give you more bottoming resistance. So as far as the front goes, if you're too soft or you feel like it sways too much, adjust your preload first and then use your clicker to fine tune. The other thing that we recommend, and it talks about it in here, you can remove your front sway bar. If your car is equipped with the front sway bar, with this setup, you don't need your front sway bar quite as much. If you do run your front sway bar, you're going to want to run a limited amount of preload, probably 4 turns or less. Without it, that's why we started about 4 turns, and you might add 1 or 2 more turns, but we prefer running without the front sway bar because we do a lot of mountain riding, rock crawling, and open desert. So when you're going through the desert, that's about the only place where the sway bar is really nice to have it. But we've tuned this so that you can run out in the open desert at high speed and have a good stiff front end so you don't get too much roll. But at the same time, without that front sway bar hooked up, the car is going to feel a lot better at low speeds. The tire is going to be able to articulate better and get through the rocks a lot faster and smoother for as far as feedback to the wheel, as well as just how the car feels for the occupants. So, and that's it. Front's done. That's how easy it was, and we're going to move on to the rear. Okay, real quick before we move on to the rear, we wanted to show you a before and after comparison. So here's the stock setup with the long tender and short main that has no crossover point. and as you all know, it just coil binds. You can actually see the wear on that spring from where the spring's been coil binding. The Zbroz Racing dual rake setup, we run a longer main and then we run a progressive tender with the crossover flip so we can force that crossover point. And that is really the key to the combination, is having the correct tender and main so that we get the right amount of progression, so that it brings the car up back to where it should be, but also has the right amount of roll stability and bottoming resistance, so that when you're jumping and going fast out through the desert, especially in sand dune type conditions where you have a lot of G-outs, having the correct amount of progression makes a huge difference. So there it is. All right, so moving on to the rears. Like I said, you can leave it still hooked up to the car and take everything off the bottom. 3/8 inch punch or some kind of a round dowel rod. The front was 1/4 inch, the rear is just a little bit bigger. So to get the preload off, you can jam that in there and twist it, because sometimes you can't get it to turn with your hand. So this one's been loosened off already. Same situation as the front. The stock tender's too light and it just runs right to coil bind, so there's no adjustment available, and that's where this kit makes such a big difference. So back the preload off, and then the springs up. The one thing that is kind of a pain that would be nice to have a screwdriver for. One tool I failed to mention would be a screwdriver, so you can push this bump stop up out of the way. It's actually a little bit easier to do when it's on the car, because you can use the spring to wedge against it. But it's just a closed cellular foam, so it's pretty hard to damage. So slide it up out of the way, pull your dust rock chip guard off. We're going to reuse that. And then your retainer. Sometimes, depending on how dirty the shocks are, these we actually clean quite a bit, but obviously it's made to go in the dirt, so sometimes you get stuck on there because you get dirt between the retainer and the eyelet. So pull that off and save it. Pull your main off. We're not going to be reusing any of that. The spring divider, we are going to reuse. The tender's coming off. Look out. It is easier to do on the car, I believe. For you folks at home, we'll help you out. Show you how to roll. So now that you got the springs off, the first thing that you're going to want to do is install this crossover nut. And again, it's 2-piece, so we talked about it. It's already been taken apart. The one thing that we get quite a bit of calls about is that guys don't get these lined up, and so then they think they're the wrong size. They can actually go either way. We've tried to pair them up when we send them to you, but sometimes when you take them apart, you forget which way they go. So don't be afraid to flip them over if it's not lining up perfectly. So should turn easily without the little screws in there. And I usually just like to put one screw in each side and just go loose so that we can still spin it around, because we'll have to set that crossover point after the preload is set. So spin those in with your little Allen. I don't know exactly what size it is. I'll look up the exact size that it is and we'll note it in the video, at the bottom of the video or something. So run that on. This is obviously a good time to clean the shock. Sometimes you'll run into where you get quite a bit of wear on the body. This body actually has quite a bit of wear to where the thread is almost completely non-existent. So if you do get to the point where there is no threads at all showing, that is a good sign that you need to replace your body. So we can help you do that. If you can send it in to us, we can change the body out. But where it's an aluminum body, that spring divider, it's just constantly wearing on there. That's why it is important that you clean your body with the pressure washer. Try to get down inside that spring divider and get all the little rocks and sand out, because that just acts like sandpaper. So now you're going to slide your tender on. That's the 10-inch long spring. And this actually probably has to go up a ways. spin that up quite a ways. And then your divider is going to go with the short lip to the tender side. So, and then the 16-inch main next. So this actually has to go up quite a ways. Slide that up. Piggybacks on the newer cars might be a little bit easier to work with, but again, if you just undo your bottom, you can slide everything on while it's still on the car. Then you're going to put your dust guard back on, and then your lower retainer. Essentially, the spring kit, when it's on the car, you just do one corner at a time, and it goes really pretty quick. So flip this back more. Again, the same instructions as the front. It's all laid out in the instruction sheet. You're going to want to take the swap out of the spring set and take it to a 0 setting. So turn it down until it touches. Once it touches, maybe go a half a turn. And then use your marker or a pen, or sometimes if you're keeping the car for a long time, I see a lot of racers that'll do that. They'll just take like a sharp punch and they'll scratch an X in, because the marker will wear off because they're always adjusting preload. So, and this is a 4-seater, so we're going to put, again, probably just 4 turns in the rear of this one. So just count your revolutions to your X. If you have a punch, you can put it in. It makes it a little bit easier. On some of the early cars, one thing that we see quite a bit is the early preload nuts were not anodized. And the body is anodized, but it's like they anodize it and then machine it after it's anodized. I'm not sure of the process that Walker Evans and Polaris is doing there, but sometimes you'll get galling. And so we offer a 2-piece preload nut that works awesome for that, because once it's galled, sometimes guys are saying you have to throw the body away because you can't get it off. Well, if you take a cutoff wheel and cut the nut off, we supply one that's 2-piece, kind of like the crossover nut, that allows you to basically fix the shock. Sometimes you'll have to buy a thread file, where again, we offer all these services. You can just send them in to us and we will do the work for you. So I'm going to put 4 turns in that, and once your preload is set to the desired ride height that you want, that's when you're going to set this crossover distance. And essentially it's a distance from the spring divider lip. I don't know if you can see it there, but it comes up inside the spring, the short edge. You're going to measure 4.75, so 4 3/4 of an inch from that lip all the way up to where it touches the crossover nut. And that's our starting point. Now the crossover can be adjusted, so if you want more bottoming resistance, you're going to move that crossover nut closer to the mainspring, but this is just the starting point. So with your measuring tape, just spin that up until you get to that 4 3/4. Again, within a revolution or something like that, and then you can tighten down those little set screws. So I'm almost there. So 4.75. So that's your travel number. And the simplest way to explain tuning the rear shock is kind of like the front. As you add preload, you're going to change your ride height. But because this has an adjustable crossover, as you add preload, it is going to cross over sooner. But if your ride height is good and all you want is bottoming resistance for the G-outs or the big bumps or jump landings and stuff like that, you don't have to adjust your preload. You can simply take this ring and move it closer to the main and force it onto the mainspring sooner, and that will give you better roll stability and bottoming resistance. But more than anything, that's your big bump tuning. So if you're bottoming out on jumps, but you like the ride height of your car and how it's cornering and everything like that, and the car's sitting fairly level, the last thing you want to do is raise the back of the car up, because that'll start to affect how it handles and corners, and it's not going to give you the bottoming resistance that you're looking for. So by adjusting your crossover, you can tune that bottoming out without adjusting your ride height. So, and then from there, once you kind of get your preload dialed in and the ride height where you want it, And a good rule of thumb that we tell everybody, it goes over it a little bit here in the instructions of how to tune it, but a rule of thumb is you want the car to sit pretty level. The XP1000s like to sit level when they're loaded up with the gear and the type of stuff you ride in, not necessarily passengers, but you want the car level. So you don't want to get the front end way higher than the back end or vice versa. You want the car to sit level. So play with your preload until the car sits close to level, and you can just eye it visually or you can pull a tape. And then from there, just go out there and find a bumpy section or a common section of trail that you ride a lot and just adjust it to your liking. So the preload will adjust your ride height, but as you get the car higher, you're going to give up cornering ability because it's going to body roll more as you get the center of gravity higher. And you'll also give up some plushness sometimes. So there's a happy balance in there. The starting settings that we give you on the instructions is really a good starting point. So if you just follow the directions and start where we're telling you, you'll be extremely happy with the improvement over stock. And then from there, as you maybe add weight to the car and things like that, you can make adjustments. So put all 4 set screws in, and you don't need to get too crazy with them. Just tighten them up by hand with a small Allen. Don't over tighten them, because when you need to get them off, sometimes you can strip them out. But if you go crazy on them in the beginning, it's just going to make it harder. So it's not going to go anywhere. That's going to be packed with dust and dirt within the first few miles of riding. So just snug them up with the Allen, put all 4 of them in, and you're good to go back on the car if you've taken it all the way off. So 2-seaters, 4-seaters, it's the same basic process. Some of the kits vary a little bit on the newer cars because they don't have a dual rake front, so we supply a divider for that front setup. But again, it's very simple to install. You can do it in your garage while the shocks are still on the car. And this really is the best upgrade for ride height improvement. On average, we see about 1.5 to 2 inches over stock. They tend to just settle as those stock tenders wear out, and you don't want to sit and play with preload constantly. So this is an easy upgrade that gets you really 70% of the way there to the Stage 3 kit that we also offer, which has internal valving and our piston design, as well as new seals and oil. So that's a great option besides the spring kit when you get a bunch of miles on your car. And these shocks are just like engine oil in your car. You need to change the oil periodically. So when you do get to that mileage point, instead of just having a service, look at upgrading the internals if you've already done the spring kit. And if you haven't done either, do the Stage 3 at once. All right, so again, a quick comparison before and after. So in my left hand, or your right, is the stock. You can see it has the small, shorter tender that just goes right to coil bind, and this is the major issue in the spring kit. Also, it doesn't have a way to force the crossover. And in my right hand, your left, is the Zbroz dual rake kit. So it has the crossover nut, the adjustable crossover nut inside the tender, and the new main and the new tender. So there you go.